Okay, so I've just finished reading The Gift of Dyslexia. All right, not a book I imagined I'd ever read, but it was lying around. I'd read everything else, so I read it anyway. And you know what? It's absolutely fascinating. So dyslexia, learning disability, whatever you want to call it, it's not what I expected. It's not what I expected. Dyslexic children think in different ways, and what they can't do is they can't use words for which there is no visual meaning. So they think visually, which is 200 to 4,000 times faster than thinking linearly, thinking in speech. So when they're reading, dyslexic people, according to this, and if you think after reading this book, I'd agree that they have certain talents which allow them to learn and master things at a rapid rate that to normal learners seems almost impossible. But it's because they use their brains in a different way. They use their brains visually. They think in pictures and images and 3D images as well. So, whereas a dyslexic might be able to see just a curled up ball of fur, what they'll be able to do is they'll take that image, they'll spin it around several ways and almost like circling it like a helicopter. And I think it's not a ball of fur, it's a cat. Okay, so for them, cat is they only need to see a bit of fur, but these letters C, A, T, they don't mean anything to them. So actually spelling cat or spelling the concepts they can easily understand becomes almost impossible. Um, so the guy who wrote this, Ronald Davis, he has come up with a cure for dyslexia. And what he does is he uses certain methods to take the dyslexics' particular skills that they're very, very good at and actually teach them to understand letters like that, teach them to understand concepts for which there is no visual explanation. Really, really an amazing book. Here's something that surprised me: Leonardo da Vinci, um, Einstein, people who were considered geniuses, they were actually dyslexic. So Da Vinci wrote. It's interesting. If you look at his notebooks, all his writing was backwards. So he'd learned to manipulate letters, not to understand them in the normal way. He'd learned to manipulate them, and when he wrote them backwards. So it was like looking at writing through a mirror. And his pictures, he could think of pictures. He drew the initial idea of a helicopter 400 years before there were helicopters, before there was such thing as an engine, because he thinks in pictures. He thought in pictures, so he didn't need all the concepts to make sense. Another interesting thing in here, just the English language phonetically is inaccurate. The rules are bendable. So reading in it, the English language has 26 letters in the alphabet, for example. Other languages, for example, have up to 50 because for them the rules, the phonetic rules, there's a letter that always says ah, whereas with English the A can be an ah, it can be an A, it can be all kinds of things. It can be silent. Um, Really fascinating book. And then it gets you thinking how dyslexics think. And also, what happens with dyslexics is because they can't, reading for them, for example, is impossible. Often algebra, normal numbers are impossible because the numbers, they don't represent anything. But if you can get a dyslexic to visualize something for each number, even if it's just, like an abacus or something, their maths is like that. So you get these savants who, there's an example of a kid in here. I think it's the writer actually. The writer was dyslexic. You learn that later on in the book. He was also an amazing artist. He was a sculptor. And how did he do it? Well, he just saw what he wanted to do and he just chipped away to create the sculpture. Um, Lots of sportsmen are dyslexic, and these people apparently they see not through hair, but they see sort of from a point around them like this, which is what creates a lot of the symptoms, such as clumsiness or disorientation. And there's ways to fix it. Now, at the end, because this is like a 400 and something, sorry, a 200 and something page book, the, he actually talks you through some of the techniques he uses. So here you can see he's got a child manipulating the letters by making them. See, dyslexics aren't good at rote learning. They're not good at being told. They have to do something. They have to learn it. So they're actually potentially much, much, much smarter than the rest of us. But the thing is, the way that everybody else has been taught to learn doesn't make sense to dyslexics because it relies on language, whereas these people think in pictures. It's really a fascinating book. Really fascinating book. And I was surprised because, like I said, this has been sitting on my table for ages. It wasn't even for me, it was lent by my sister to somebody else, to my wife, but she's never read it. So I thought, I've read everything, I'll just read this. Um, the Gift of Dyslexia: Why Some of the Brightest People Can't Read and How They Can Learn. It's a long time since I read a book that surprised me this much. Um, it really has surprised me. And then what happens is dyslexics, nobody likes failing at something. So this kid who's so used to doing things and can do them without thinking. So there was an example of him I was talking about where algebra, he got every single question right. He could get every answer right, everything, within seconds. But he scored zero on his test because he couldn't show how he worked it out. By working in pictures, which is so much more efficient, by working in images, by understanding abstract concepts, because you can make an image for it, but not for these things. Trigger words. Trigger words are a, the, is, for which there's no visual explanation. If you can get dyslexics to understand the visual, then there's a therapy he talks about in here that can raise them sort of like 4 or 5 reading grades within about an hour. It's amazing. Their brains function differently. There's nothing wrong with their brains. But then what happens is you try and force them. The teachers who don't understand they're dyslexic. So how can you not understand that? So what they do is they think up creative methods of memorizing these squiggles or these squiggles. It says there, it says this, but they don't manipulate it. It just sort of, when I see those, I have to say the word the, but it's not making sense to them. But they're creative enough that they can do it, and then eventually what happens is they're doing what the teacher wants them to do, but they're not actually learning anything. Whereas if you can just, it's like everybody else learns by bicycle, and these dyslexics aren't bicycles, they're jet planes, but no one's figured out how to ride a jet plane yet. This guy figured it out. It's a really good book. I mean, whether or not you're interested in dyslexia, just for interesting reading, I'd recommend this. This is so good. Um, Boundless imagination, boundless creativity. That's what these people have. And it's just a matter of understanding it. Reading it from a non-dyslexic perspective, although reading it, some of those things, I thought, damn, maybe I'm dyslexic. Maybe she is dyslexic. Because I never knew what the symptoms were. I just thought a dyslexic was someone who muddled their words up. It's so much more than that. So much more than that. Not on everybody's reading list, I guess. But the world's most widely used method of correcting dyslexia, the gift of dyslexia, why some of the brightest people can read and how they can't read and how they can learn. Ronald D. Davis. Look, if it's lying around, if you know someone with this book, you might know someone who's dyslexic. Read it. It's really good. It's really interesting. I didn't even read the back, so I just picked it up and started reading. I'll pick a random one. What do Leonardo DiCaprio... Sorry, it's late in the evening. What do Leonardo da Vinci, Whoopi Goldberg, and Walt Disney all have in common? Dyslexia. Though one may think they achieved success in spite of their disability, Ronald D. Davis says it's because of it. Once students remove the obstacles to learning, they are free to capitalize on the innate gifts dyslexia can bring. That's from New Woman. Now that's another thing I never would have read. Really enjoyed it. Might read it again actually. Okay, hope you got something from that.